And happy Halloween, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to be having my two special guests on, Jessica Freeburg and Natalie Fowler. You guys are becoming quite the regulars, and there's a good reason for that because we always have a good time. You have great stories. So happy Halloween, everyone. If you have any stories of your own tonight, later on, I'm going to share a link, and then you can join video and audio, or you can join just audio. It's up to you. And then would love to hear your story as well. So let's bring on our guests, Natalie and Jessica. How are you?
Hey,
Hey,
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Happy Halloween.
You too.
Great.
I have to kind of I'm gonna merge our works. So you guys focused on a book called Ghostly Tales of Pennsylvania,
Yes.
and we're here. And I'm actually going to be in Carbondale, Pennsylvania next weekend doing a presentation about UFO debunking at what's called the Carbondalian Festival, based on a UFO event that took place there in 1974. Uh, so I'm really, really excited to be doing
So
that.
cool.
And yeah, so there's so much going on. We live here in the Hudson Valley, but all of these areas out here where there's lots of woods and lots of hills, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, which cover all that. There are no shortage of creepy tales. So being that I'm born and raised in New Jersey, I have to start with the Jersey Devil. So can we take us down that road just a
Yes.
little bit? Okay.
I'm going to let Natalie take it away because she did a lot of research on that one for us.
So this was a really fun story to write because it was there were just so many versions, and it was also an older story. So it was a little difficult to try to just go back to that moment in the 1800s, the original. So the trick was to try to find a way to tell the story where you could kind of cover all of those versions. And I happen to have I have back issues of Fate magazine all over my house because I still keep in touch with Phyllis, and when we started working on this book, it was the first book we had done in a while. So I grabbed stacks of these old Fate back issues and just started flipping through looking for a way to kind of rein in all the research and all the variations of that story and kind of try to find a starting point. And one of the stories I came across talked about how sightings increased after a forest fire, and there had been the second forest fire that got started because a flare from a nearby air base caught the area, caught a whole section of the forest on fire nearby. And so I happen to have a friend of mine who's a firefighter and super interested in the paranormal. So I thought, oh, this is perfect. I'm gonna have this firefighter going in to fight the fire and reminiscing about all the stories his babysitter told him about the New Jersey Devil. So it was a great way. We have a little bit of creative freedom with this to kind of create some characters in order to frame the stories sometimes. So it was just a fun one to write.
Do you think it's real?
I do. I mean,
do you?
It's so hard to say. Like, do I think the Jersey Devil is necessarily what we think it is? I think people are seeing something. So I think the sightings are real. Now, what exactly that is, it's kind of like the Bigfoot phenomenon, right? Like, people are seeing something, but what is it exactly? I don't know. Was it a malformed baby that came from Mother Leeds? Like, I don't know if I believe the backstory to it, but there's something out there
that's a really interesting point. Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said about how these stories take on a life of its own for different ulterior motives. I mean, in this case, the story was retold many, many times as a way to get children to behave. Like, if you don't behave, the New Jersey Devil's going to come get you. So that was kind of how I couched the story when we worked on it. So
fortunately, my parents didn't threaten me with that story.
with creatures, and
we were right. We grew up right next to the Bass River, so yeah.
Oh, you were right there. Yeah, and another thing I think about with some of these creatures too is kind of the phenomenon of like a tulpa, where we talk so much about something, we give so much energy to a legend that it becomes real.
Mhm.
Like
Mm.
Slenderman. That's one of my favorite examples because we know how that originated. It wasn't ever a real thing, but after it was in the world and people became very obsessed with it and interested in it, suddenly you have actual sightings of Slenderman, and there's video that you can see and pictures that, kind of show evidence that now Slenderman is a thing. So do we kind of manifest what we put our energy and our thoughts into sometimes?
Well, it could be like the way people claim that we interpret UFOs differently than ancient peoples interpret them. In the past, they would have said they were angels, and now we see them as something different. Maybe Slenderman, people are actually seeing something like the Shadow Person, people, or
Yeah.
the Hat Man, and they're just attributing it to the Slender Man. They're kind of overlaying how they interpret. Um, but the Jersey Devil, you made an interesting point that perhaps the lead story is just a kind of a backstory tacked onto something that people are
Mhm.
actually seeing. So two totally separate things. People are seeing something in the woods, in the Pine Barrens, and then this other thing happens. There's another legend about it, this beastly thing that's released, at birth, and then they merge.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Okay, we nailed that one. We
I think
can
we did. I
put a
think we
pin
just
in it.
solved all the mysteries right there. It's over. We're done.
But in all of your research, like what in let's stick to Pennsylvania for a little bit. We'll go from Jersey to Pennsylvania. What is the creepiest story or creature that you've come across?
One of my favorite things that we got to do this time around was also write about ghost stories, because I kind of think of Natalie and I as like the ghost girls first and the monster girls second.
Okay.
We originated in the ghosts, right? We grew up having personal experiences with the ghosts, and that's
Yeah.
kind of what led us into this journey that we're presently on. So for me, during the writing of these two books, as we had Ghostly Tales of Pennsylvania come out and The Monsters of the Northeast, my real favorite was writing some of these ghost stories. And I found them so chilling, in part because the history was so tragic. And a lot of that tragedy is what fed into now what we experience as hauntings. So I think about like Eastern State Penitentiary, for
Mhm.
example. That was a structure created with such good intent. They really wanted it to be a place where people could become reformed and have penance for their crime, and find a better path
Mhm.
through complete solitude, which actually ended up making them crazy and
Yeah.
made them worse. And so we have this great idea, and this is what we do as humans and mankind. We take this great thing and we're like, look at this wonderful thing we have, and then we just ruin it, and that's
Yeah.
that's the thing that fascinated me the most. And so looking at the history behind the hauntings was the most exciting. So Eastern State was one of my favorites that we got to write about, in the history of that.
Didn't that close down like pretty late too, like in the 70s or something, or was it even later than that?
Oh, I'm gonna have to look at the date, when it closed. I don't recall exactly. I think it was a little later. Do you remember, Natalie? This
No,
was
I'm
like 4
terrible
books
at
ago. Now I'm gonna
So
look in my book.
so when we do know that anywhere there's been some kind of trauma, that there is a residual something that people are picking up on, right?
Yeah. Oftentimes you have residual energy. I do think that there's some intelligent hauntings that go on in some of these places too, that we have souls that, for whatever reason, they just aren't at peace and they don't feel comfortable crossing over. You think about a place like Eastern State Penitentiary, and you have people there for committing crimes, some of them really horrible crimes, right? And so the idea of Christian faith being that either when you die, you cross over to heaven or you cross over to hell. Well, if the light's coming for you, you're maybe not going to go to it because you don't think you get to go someplace very nice. And so I think there's some of that there as well.
All right, so you guys write about vampires.
I was going to go there next,
Oh
actually,
yeah,
when you talked
like
about
tell
the
because
Yes.
that is I never heard anything growing up
No, like
about vampires.
one of my favorite parts of working at, I mean, they're so research based, and we're huge history nerds and research geeks. And whenever there's a chance to preserve a piece of history that might have otherwise been forgotten, it's kind of a cool rush. And I came across that when we were doing the research for the monster book, and I'm looking through, vampires, the vampire Mercy Brown. And so you start diving into the different vampire stories, and you realize that this is a period of time that almost got completely forgotten, because it was kind of the backwoods. They were getting their news and information from the traveling preachers. And at the same time, that coincided with the consumption, which now we know was tuberculosis. Incredibly contagious. It was wiping out whole families, and in their grief and despair, they and also not wiping them out very quickly. Over the course of 20 years, these families would just get wiped out completely. And so they were looking for answers, and those answers came in the form of a traveling preacher, and that had a theory about how the vampires were coming back from the grave to feast on their family members. And the way you could tell this was if you dug up the body and there was a root that had gone through, and then later the story evolved that if there was any blood left in the organs or in the body, then that was a sign that this person was a vampire and they were coming back from the grave to feast on their family members.
So let's if something like organic in nature, some environmental condition, preserve the body longer, or
well, that was the last one. Mercy Brown was the last known as the last vampire, and the poor girl, I think she had to bury her older sister, her mother. I mean, just one right after the other over the course of 10 years. And she finally gets this and gets sick and dies. And I think she died in the winter time, so January. And her brother goes on to get sick, and the father is just beside himself with grief. So he's going to latch onto whatever theory he can to try to save his son. And so they go digging up this body. Well, I mean, it was wintertime, so that's going to naturally preserve a lot of what was left. And it was only a couple months later. So she was declared a vampire. And I think the townspeople kind of were going a little crazy at this point, and the solution was to burn her heart and make him drink it. So
I'm sorry, make him drink it?
Yeah, it was like it was getting a little like out of control by that point. And actually, and in that story, there was a doctor in town who, and that was the research had the townspeople going to the doctor to try to get him to help with this, and he's like, absolutely not, I'm not going to be part of this. But yeah.
So here, what's the rationale? Did they say about what the drinking of the heart
was supposedly to stop it and preserve? And
superstition.
Superstition. And the original, one of the other vampire stories in there was that some boys were playing in a rock pile and they found a human skull. And one of the kids took it home and he wanted to keep it, and the mom made him call the police. And it started this whole archaeological dig of this area, and they ended up finding a forgotten town or a family, rather large cemetery that had gotten forgotten. And one of the coffins that they pulled up, when they opened it, they found that the head, the bones were arranged like the Jolly Roger, and they could not figure out why. So
that's bizarre.
Yeah. So they put their head. I mean, this was an archaeological site for a while, and they had students come through, and then finally somebody mentioned, well, have you heard about the vampire legends? And they started looking into it, and that was supposedly a way to stop the vampire from coming back to pursue their family members was to rearrange the bones so they couldn't get out of their coffin.
Why don't they just like tie them up? Just, why
I
go
don't
through
know.
all this rigmarole? Like,
We could go back and
you know?
ask. I don't think they had the most accurate information at that point.
Yeah, I don't think they had encyclopedias at the time.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
Or Google.
Or Google, right? Google, how does one prevent the rising of the dead?
yeah,
Right.
right. But I just love that. I love that series of stories because they aren't even actual monsters. No, they're so different than any of our other monster stories because nobody actually saw something. It was all this fear that created this legend that became alive, and they took it in their own hands to try to do something about it.
Did you guys do you dress up or the kids dress up? What do you do for Halloween?
Well, we both have 2 kids in college.
Well, you're dressed as a cow. I can see that right
I'm a cowgirl with pigtails.
Oh, there you go. Nice. Okay.
But my youngest did dress up this year. She was Minion. She went out with her cousin.
Cool.
So
I got a new shirt that came just in time for Halloween, and it's you can't see it very well, but it says "I'm fine" across it, and it's all bloody on the side.
Bloody, right.
And I was joking that ever since I joined the Horror Writers Association, my Facebook feed has gotten really interesting. So
yeah, but there is that.
Purchase.
Yeah, it's true though. Like in the paranormal world, or especially people who appreciate and love horror movies and the paranormal and stories, that's definitely their kind of humor. It's like
yeah. I think I'm gonna wear it on a not Halloween day because I'll get a better reaction.
I think you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Nobody really noticed it today. I was disappointed.
Yeah, because their costumes are even bloodier and
yeah.
Yeah, they'll notice it when you wear it Christmas shopping.
I know, exactly. That's totally my sense of humor too. Like my daughter, one time we ended up with this old, awful like rat Halloween decoration. And she was about 10 years old and she carried this thing around. And it was the size of a baby doll. So she would walk into the grocery store holding it like it was her baby. Just to see what people would do. It was
it's funny you say we have a rat that's like it looks like this like crazy rat, and it looks like it's ready to dive and commit suicide. and it's placed, gently on a bookshelf, and yeah.
My kids, I was going to say my kids had a skeleton. We called him Mr. Bones, and all 3 of my kids took him everywhere. Like he would ride with us to the store in the back seat, buckled in, and whenever we'd go through like the bank to do a deposit or whatever, they'd be like, "Do you want how many suckers do you want? Do you want 4 for all of your kids?" And I'm like, "Oh, that one's a skeleton."
Passable.
Yeah.
Well, we did.
My love of my life just passed our crazy scroll.
So cute.
We had a trip to Deadwood planned right after our first monster book came out, and Jessica and I drove all the way to Deadwood with Bigfoot buckled in the back seat.
Yeah.
Just to see what people would say.
I wouldn't be surprised if somebody made a report into MUFON. Like, I saw this thing.
We stuffed him with newspaper.
Yeah. It's it's interesting with some of the MUFON reports we get. There's a mix, like people will mix in some like more paranormal stuff, and we're really not supposed to be investigating that unless it's like directly related to the UFO or the ET phenomenon. But I wonder, like, when you're researching these cryptids in the Northeast, were there any correlation between UFO sightings or ETs?
I didn't have a lot of that in this particular selection. I weirdly, like, I spoke at MUFON a few years ago after the Monsters of the Midwest came out, and then for that presentation, I started researching if there was a connection. When I was writing the book, I wasn't really thinking about that. But when I was invited to come speak, I was like, well, I don't want to just talk about monsters. I want to see if there's, some, element of extraterrestrial that I can bring into it. And I did find quite a startling number of encounters or sightings of UFO phenomenon in the areas where these encounters were taking place around the same time. One in particular was about this beast that was in the river,
Yeah.
and it was very alienish, just by description. But then you add in the element of there were actually UFO sightings not far from there. That kind of takes it to the next level.
And with that story, the family got a Men in Black visit after that too.
Yeah,
Like,
Oh,
they did.
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, was it the typical Men in Black, or was it more alien-like?
They came to her and told her not to talk about it anymore. Basically, it was that kind of Men in
Men
Black
in
too.
suits.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they were like, "No more."
it's because it's interesting how the descriptions of the Men in Black have kind of or vary. I shouldn't say change, but vary. Like John Keel's, the Mothman Prophecies, he talks about them having more of like a brown tone skin, like not a typical like
Oh.
Caucasian looking,
Mm.
right? Maybe more Middle Eastern or Indian or something like that. And then you get more modern, and it seems the reports seem to be more like drawn white, or having like big eyes and this sort of thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and they didn't really get into that in the description that we found of that situation. But it was also kind of around the same time with the Kelly Hopkinsville, Kentucky encounter, and that wasn't very far away from where there was also, you had that clawed monster in the water. I think we called it the green clawed monster or something to that effect. And then you had these sightings of like frog-like creatures, kind of another state over, but it was kind of in this like little triangle. And
Frog-like creatures, like big or small, or
big frogmen,
Mm.
that
oh,
people were seeing, and including police officers who were, like reporting it, and then like they were like, "Oh, now I'm embarrassed that I said that out loud." But there were these big frogs that people were seeing that were bipedal, basically, and walking across the roads. And some people reported they had like a hat and a cane, like they were like magicians.
really?
I don't
Like they're
know.
gonna burst into dance.
That
Like
was in
in the
Ohio, I
Muppets.
believe.
I mean, it's challenging because there are so many reports, and when you have repeat reports and descriptions of people who are, seemingly otherwise sober, then you have to
Yeah.
believe that there's something there. But then you add on cane and a hat, and suddenly it's very difficult to believe.
And you're like, "Were there
How do you,
mushrooms on your pizza? Like, are they magic mushrooms?"
You almost hear the song "Hello, my darling, hello, my baby"
hello, my
playing in the back.
darling, hello. Right, exactly.
Literally.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's
Oh,
funny.
I heard actually, I don't know if you heard, but they are going to do a Spaceballs 2.
Ooh,
Yeah.
yes.
So yeah, Mel Brooks he's like 90, I think now, but he's still gonna be on as a producer. And then there's a new director and another writer, they're all working together to do it. So yeah. Speaking
That's
of,
really
yeah.
cool.
What's your favorite horror Halloween movie?
Mm. I don't like anything gory, so I'm never gonna like a Saw movie, like, I don't like
Hmm.
those. I really, like, fall back into the Stephen King classics, like, anything Stephen King. Give me Pet Sematary, like, The Shining, of course,
Yeah.
Carrie, any of those old classics. I'm all about it. His new book, I don't know if you guys have checked it out yet, but he has a new compilation of short stories out. It's amazing.
Really? So he's
Yeah.
still writing very well.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So good.
That's awesome. We watched tonight a little bit of Thriller, the whole original Thriller,
Oh.
the full video, music video. It's still slightly dated, now that you look at it, but like it's still it's like a music video classic.
Yeah. At
And
the
the
time,
special
it was
effects.
cutting edge. I was just
Oh,
gonna say cutting edge special effects back in the day.
yeah, but I still appreciate that, like the prosthetics, the mechanical, the puppeteering. Like it's brilliant the way they cut edit, right? Like there's like a little bit of progress in the face, like whiskers coming out, then it cuts away,
Yeah.
cuts back, and the face is more deformed as he's turning into a werewolf. And I mean, I love that stuff. If it's too CGI, it's like it's just smoothed out. It doesn't feel real.
Yeah. Yeah, we're getting into a scary I mean, speaking of scary things, just AI is such a every time, I do Darkness Radio with Tim Dennis and he starts talking about AI stuff, I'm like, "I don't even wanna know. I just don't tell me. I don't wanna hear about it." It's creepy.
Well, I think that the thing that is scary about it is the unknown. Oh, hey, look at that. We have a
I
fourth
know. It's
guest.
that time of night where everybody needs their snuggle.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, because we don't know where it's actually gonna go. My wife was just sharing a report with me today that she was reading about some AI that they were trying to get to do some tasks, and the way they described it was that the AI was getting bored, so it decided to do something else. I don't know if bored is the right word because that's a human sensation, a feeling. But the fact that it's like, oh, it's doing something different we didn't plan on, right? So as it gets more complex and gets smarter, that could be Pandora's box, right?
Yeah, you don't want your computer or your robot to have free will choice.
Right. Yes. I mean, I know there are some parameters that are put in there, but um, you know, you don't make progress unless you push boundaries, especially in science and engineering and experimentation. Like you have to do it. So like I get it why they push the boundaries, but I kind of feel like the government really does need to step in and create some like safety protocols that are, you know,
Yeah,
Give some rules.
it's hard when it's evolving so fast though too.
Yeah.
Like you can't stay on top. I
that's a
mean,
good point. Yeah.
you know, if you think of last year at this time, it was literally just coming out and now it's everywhere. So it's hard to regulate something that you don't even fully understand yet.
Well, talking about like scary, do freaky, uncanny valley. Do you remember when that video of Will Smith eating spaghetti came out? Like it was like the first video they showed of AI. I think it was about like 5 years ago, and it was like so weird and like uncanny. But that was like the first revealing of this is what we're working on. It's coming soon, and people were like, "Whoa, no, I don't need that. Thank you." Uh, but like the intro that I did tonight, all those images were done on AI.
Yeah.
That was really
Uh,
cool.
It was cool. And the thing is, like, but they can make people look so real, and the ability to make it look like, the president of the United States is saying
yeah.
something that he never said.
Mhm.
Like that kind of stuff, I think is pretty scary because it's hard for us to disseminate information. We're just so inundated with so much information, and it's
Mhm.
hard to know what to believe.
That's why you come to Mystic Lounge and
Yeah.
the Unex Network, so you can just focus on the paranormal and UFOs, and it doesn't matter, what you believe. There's
Yeah.
something about the mystery of it. I think that's so enjoyable. Um, Whereas the mystery of AI is not enjoyable. It's
No,
scary.
it's
It's
too creepy.
yeah.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I love writing mysteries. I mean, we're both we're both fiction writers too, and
Hmm.
in that you can completely control the outcome and wrap things up in a nice pretty bow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well, speaking
Yeah.
of pretty bows, so
this could go anywhere right
Yeah.
now.
What are we segueing into?
can you just tell us about the Harrisburg State Hospital at all? Um, because I'm just kind of focused on Pennsylvania right now, and we were watching this documentary with Martha Stewart, and she goes to jail, when she was convicted of insider trading,
Yeah.
and even though it was supposed to be like a softer jail, like even there it was like a little scary for her, right? So I just want to get your take on these prisons, and um, have you have you been able to look at prisons, compare them with the presence of whatever is being haunted, or the presence of spirits, and gauge if the infrastructure of the prison has and the way it was run has anything to do with the residuals, or is it just that prisons themselves are just create trauma across the board, and then you have these residual effects, ghosts, whatever?
Yeah, I think, with Harrisburg and like Penhurst is another example. So
Hmm.
those were institutions. They weren't necessarily hospitals. They were where we would send people if they presented as being what we considered crazy. basically back in the day, right?
Hmm.
And that could mean a lot of different things. Like when we were researching that, I was astounded by the things that could get you put in a mental
Yes.
hospital.
Hmm.
Reading too many books was one of them. I'm like, I would have
Crazy.
so
Yeah.
been put away for many, many reasons.
Talking back.
Yeah, having an
Mm.
opinion that just
Right.
didn't align with everyone else's. Um, People were put into these hospitals for having epilepsy, which we know is not a mental illness, it's a
Hmm.
physical condition, and but then you did have people who sincerely had really severe mental illnesses. And then in a lot of these hospitals, you did also have them bringing over people who were considered criminally insane. So they were charged with crimes, convicted of crimes, and then put over in the hospitals. I think Harrisburg was one that was a little bit nicer overall. Generally, I think they tried to do it really right there.
Hmm.
When I think of the the institutions we wrote about that were really tragic and sad, I think of Penhurst as being probably one of the worst. Again, great intentions, just like with Harrisburg.
Hmm.
Um, but they ended up, being so overwhelmed with the number of people that were brought into all of these
Mhm.
facilities, hospitals, and, penitentiaries included. That's kind of the storyline that we kept seeing over and over again. Overcrowding and undereducation of the people that are working there. They said with Penhurst, you really didn't have to know much about taking care of people. You just kind of had to be willing to show up.
Yeah.
And so then you had, understaffing and patients helping take care of patients and help patients doing jobs they shouldn't have been doing, and people shackled to their beds. Penhurst in particular, they did a documentary in the 70s, and I don't think it was a full documentary. It was more like a news piece. But the reporter who came in, the journalist who came in, said he couldn't even keep cameramen on staff because they were literally getting physically ill
Hmm.
from the smell. And what they were seeing was so disturbing because there was just feces and urine all over, naked men who were, emaciated, standing in the corners, swaying to music on their own, children in cribs that couldn't walk because they'd never been allowed to walk. They didn't get out of their cribs.
Wow.
So it's almost like the worst form of torture you could imagine.
Yeah.
And just a lot of tragedy in those places, just of those are people too who have human desires. And so you had a lot of sexual assaults going on in the
Mhm.
evenings of patients attacking patients, and just a lot of sadness. So that really, to me, those institutions just can't help but be a container.
Yeah, we always think of ghosts as having experienced some kind of trauma or something horrible happened, revenge, bitterness, whatever. But what about the people that cared and maybe they couldn't do anything? Do they show up? Is there a is there a medium and mediumship where you can connect with those kinds of spirits?
There was a story, I'm not remembering which institution it was, but there was a worker who was commonly seen, and a personality that they knew. And I think there are just so many layers that go into like causing something to be haunted, and
Mhm.
that residual energy. And as Jessica was talking, you just think of all the fear that would have, I mean, just every single one of those patients would have been afraid of
Yeah.
what was coming next. You've got the fear of the workers, the employees who are working there that don't know what to do, and they're afraid of the people that they're taking care of. So that emits and layers into the space. And then you've got the people who are passionately trying to do something to make it better,
Mm.
and all that emotion, and they're all the rough and tough emotions
Yeah.
too, is
Yeah.
the fear and the worry and the overwhelm and anxiety.
Yeah.
Um,
And at Penhurst, there was actually a doctor who has been seen. They turned one of the buildings into like a home for women and their children when they were kind of in between homes. And so there were a lot of single moms with a lot of children, and there's a gymnasium that they created, and it was formerly, one of the patients' resident halls. But the kids would report in the 80s of this man in a white coat, and he would play with them and they loved him. He was kind, and they thought he was wonderful, and he
Mhm.
was reported by so many children. And so that's exactly what you're talking about. There was a caretaker whose spirit came back and was with these little children, almost being a caretaker again.
We have a question from the Instagram chat from a friend, Mariah Canal. And she says, have you ever analyzed the geology of the land where the institutions, prisons are located?
I've not personally. I would say, anytime you have things by water, I think that amplifies it. So
Mhm.
that's one thing. What do you think, Natalie?
My best example of this is the Palmer House Hotel in Sauk
Yeah.
Center is actually on a ley line, an energy line that kind of connects different places, and that is crazy. If you go stand on that, um, I've been to psychic development classes. Suzanne Wardley is a practitioner that goes there and teaches a class where she actually has participants line up along the line and close their eyes without telling them what it is, and it's hysterical to watch because everybody will just start swaying and you feel it. So I think that there's a lot to that, and like Jessica was saying, with water, being around water, you've also got like a lot of the East Coast stuff is on native land too. I mean, well,
Mhm.
everywhere in the United States, there's a lot that can happen on native land, and there's a lot of energy involved with that as well.
Yeah, and Maria says there could be limestone quartz, which can be
Yeah.
conduits. In the
Mhm.
Hudson Valley, especially in the Pine Bush area, we definitely have higher, just naturally, electromagnetic.
Yeah,
And
I felt it at the Stanley Hotel. I was on a tour in the
Mm,
basement, and you could feel like it just was buzzy down there.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what it is exactly, but there's just certain elements that seem to be a conduit and create a greater magnitude, or maybe turn the volume up a little bit on this type of stuff. So that's a really good point.
yeah. Next time you guys come to the Hudson Valley, you have to let me know. This-
Well,
Yeah, the
well,
Stanley's not that far away, actually. So. Yeah, and that's one of the biggest hotspots. That is like I consistently hear investigators discuss the Stanley. Like,
oh,
Yeah.
and I was actually talking about the Stanley in
oh, the
Colorado.
Shanley. I'm sorry. Yeah, you
Oh,
said
Yeah,
Stanley. You're right. You're
Stanley.
right. Right. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, yeah.
No, but I know we looked at doing something out at the
Yep.
Shanley one time. I
yeah. Yeah,
remember
we
looking at
did.
that.
Yeah.
So
It's so. Well, you've not been there, or you?
no, I have not. We haven't been
Okay.
out to the East Coast yet. We're going to plan a visit, I think, this spring.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. We
Yeah. Yeah.
might have
Definitely let me
an
know for sure.
event out there in April.
Well, it's like springtime here right now. It is so warm. It's
Quit
crazy.
bragging.
We had
It
No,
snow
snowed
today.
here
what,
today.
what do you guys have? What temperature?
Well, it was 70 a couple days ago, and now, and then it snowed all morning. So these
Yeah, it
poor
Oh
was
no! Oh
kids.
wow.
really
Okay.
blizzarding outside my window, legitimately.
That
I was
okay, no,
not
we're not.
happy.
That's not us at all. It was like it reached 80, 81 today.
Mm.
And it's warm. Like almost wish we had the air conditioner in still. Like
Oh,
it's
no.
that warm. Yeah.
We've got the AC.
Well,
I've got a blanket on my lap right now. I'm cold.
we had a huge Halloween blizzard in 1991, and everybody talks about it. And these poor kids today, when it started snowing, I'm sure they already have to hear about it enough. Like, I mean, talk about feeling old. Like, oh, when I was a kid, we walked through trick or treating in a snowstorm in 1991, and all the kids today had to hear double about that because it started snowing this morning. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like hearing the stories of like I had to walk 20 miles to the school bus when I was your age.
Uphill both ways.
Bills both ways.
Yep.
Exactly. It's interesting too because you were talking about earlier how people were misdiagnosed and let's say had epilepsy, they thought you were possessed or psychologically disturbed later on, and then later on they figured out it was actually physiological, and
Right.
had nothing to do with the actual the psychology. And it's I've been experimenting recently, thanks to the recommendation of my wife, and I've been pretty much gluten free.
Mm.
Mhm.
It's too early to tell, but I can tell you for a fact that I feel better. like
Yeah.
like no doubt.
Well,
Like
I have celiac, so I definitely feel better if I'm
okay,
Yeah.
gluten-free.
yeah,
Yeah.
like because I was and it's still there lingering for sure, but because I know it can take many months before like the inflammation really actually calms down. But like I had like serious brain fog, like scary brain fog.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's already receding. And at first I thought, is this psychosomatic? Is it like a placebo effect? And then and it's not. It's definitely not. Even my skin's getting better right now, knock on wood. So
Yeah.
I was just thinking, maybe some of these people who, you know, um, are let's say psychic mediums or even people on the other side who've passed over, um, were let's say you were struggling with a particular disease and someone on the other side had died or in some related way or suffered in some related way with that disease. Does that give you a kind of like a line like to connect?
I mean, I think we're all divine beings, and you've got, the theories of consciousness, and I think we're all connected. And whenever you have something like that, that's gonna maybe illustrate a similarity. That's the story that's coming to my mind. I worked as a ghostwriter on a story for a family the dad had gotten a lung transplant, and he started having visions of the woman who had died in a motorcycle accident, whose lungs he had received in that. And he started having glimpses. He even kind of took on some of her personality traits.
Hmm.
And you read about those stories if you study some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard about that, and I guess I'm thinking it's like I feel your pain kind of a thing. So like if somebody on the other side had experienced something, and then the medium has had a similar experience, then does that kind of form a bridge between the two?
I think there can be a lot of bridges for sure.
A lot of different bridges. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
All right. Are there werewolves in our area? Like,
Of course.
of course, where isn't there a werewolf?
Or
Um,
dog man, some
Yeah.
variation.
or
Oh,
Dogman. Yeah. Yeah.
Dogman's my favorite, and I'm I'm just so into Dogman. I don't ever want to meet one. They seem very scary to me. All the stories that I've researched about them.
Hmm.
I don't think we had a Dogman in Pennsylvania, but we had one in the Pacific Northeast, which will come out next fall. And that story creeped me out so much. And the source was it came from a pastor, a minister who went out with a friend, kind of looking for Bigfoot. And he kind of lived next to this kind of, they were kind of on the top of a gorge. So they were above the gorge, but down below there were all the trees and,
Hmm.
the beautiful things. But up above it was a little bit more deserty. And, but he kept hearing weird noises out there at night. And he was convinced there was Bigfoot. And so he had a friend or a person at church, actually, he was chatting to after service one day. And he worked for the state and he took them out and they kind of went, looking around to see if there might be something to Bigfoot out there. And when they were out there, it started to get dark and their phones started to run low on battery. They were out there longer than they expected. And in the darkness, they saw a creature run across the path. And they weren't quite sure what it was, but it was very big and dark and bulky and tall. And they went back to the pastor's house and they were very creeped out by what they'd seen. And that subsequently after that, the pastor and his family were haunted and like basically stalked by this creature. They would hear it on the roof of their house at night. He sent me photographs of the snow on his roof with basically like paw prints, like they were kind of triangular, and had toes. They were not normal looking at all. They were
Okay.
quite large. And his wife saw at one point something big with a big, almost like a dog head, look over the top of their privacy fence, which
Hmm.
was like 8 foot tall. And it was just standing there looking over it at her. the kids, it was knocking on windows at night, almost kind of like beckoning the kids out. And that's one of the things with the Dogman legend, is that they do kind of say that they kind of go after children and try to convince them. They can make their voice sound like your mom, calling for you to come outside or whatever. And so like that story was so creepy, and coming from like a man of the cloth, right? And so like he was like, they just had some special holy water and oils that he had been given by somebody. And they went outside and they made little crosses from some of the leaves and trees that were around their yard, and they
Mhm.
buried them, set an intention, basically, this is
Mhm.
what our intentions are so strong. They set an intention and they believed in that
Sure.
intention and what they
Yeah.
did to protect their space. And after that, it never came to their home again, but they would still sometimes hear it kind of howling out in the gorge. But
Yeah, it's interesting how belief really is very powerful, because you could be of different religions. There's religions all around the world that have different methodologies, right, for keeping evil or demons or whatever at bay. Um, and it works seems to work when people employ these.
yeah, I think like, sometimes Natalie and I will help people if they have energy in their house, if they're experiencing a haunting, and you can go in and clear someone's home. And to me, it really is setting intention and just believing in your intention and the power of you as the physical being over the power of the being that doesn't have a body, and, setting the intention that it needs to leave. I know, Natalie, you probably have some thoughts to add to that.
Well, I think like, one of the ways that I describe it is that thought becomes an intention. It's like a ribbon of energy that goes out there. And it works both ways, right? Like we all know those people that keep complaining about things, and then the bad things keep happening. I mean, you can almost watch that on Facebook.
Mm,
Like the people that are complaining all the time about something bad happening, it just keeps coming their way. So you have to just be really careful about those energy signatures that you are putting out there.
mhm.
And so, you know, but yeah, it's the power of manifestation.
Yeah, and what you focus on, right?
Hmm.
Like, November is actually gratitude month, and it's, like, actually physiologically impossible to be sad if you're thankful for something, because your mind can't focus on those 2 separate energies at the same time, like, the synapses cannot connect. So, physiologically, you cannot be grateful and sad at the same time. So, setting the
Yeah.
intention and what you focus on, and I think like attracts like, and I think
Yeah.
that is such a true thing. Like, if I'm just focusing on the good stuff that's happening in my life, and then I'm just gonna get more good stuff, and I truly believe that, and see that happening all the time for myself and my family.
And we talk about the veils are thinning, as our vibrations are rising. If you are studying at all about the age of Aquarius, and
Mhm.
our vibrations are rising, so that's causing the veil to be thinner, which translates to all of this being even more so. There's
Right.
no
Right.
protection there anymore, so you have to be very, very careful about what you're putting out there. So when
So
you're
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
putting fear out there, that's going to draw some really negative energy in.
The Age of Aquarius. So how does that apply? Well, okay, first, can you explain that, and then how does that apply to the paranormal?
um I'm a little rusty because I've been working on monster books. No, just in general, the theory comes from astrology, and actually I think we're sitting on, like, I think I just saw that we're on the day Capricorn. Pluto has been in Capricorn for the last 20 years, right?
Hmm.
I'm gonna mess up the dates, and my astrology friends are gonna I'm gonna hear about it from them. But um yeah, so we've been in Capricorn energy, which is very survivor energy. And there's a couple of different things going on. But the Age of Aquarius is more about the paradigm shift. Um, for from the time Christ came along, it was about the searching for a savior, that in God we trust. Um, so it was the age of Pisces, I believe. I am so rusty with this stuff, so bear with
I
me.
can't
But
So
help.
it's getting thin.
but as we move into the age of Aquarius, the concepts are that we're finding the savior in ourselves.
Mhm.
Like we don't have anyone
I see.
going to come to save
Okay.
us. We have to just save ourselves. That we have to find that divine spark in our own selves. But in all of that, it's causing the vibration of the planet to rise. And I have a friend who studies the Schumann resonance, and his theory is that the
Mhm.
more light workers out there that are doing energy clearing and shifting things, we're actually shifting the vibration of the planet in a measurable way as we're kind of waking up to what all of this is, and our gifts and our abilities, and embracing that and heading towards more of a spiritual being that's raising the vibration of our planet. And that's the age of Aquarius. So I started off talking about totally the wrong thing.
But does that affect the does that affect the paranormal?
Well, so like if you are raising your vibration, it just you've got all these people embracing their spiritual gifts, and so it's just lessening the distance between us and spirit in that vibrational space. So there is no veil. I think a lot of people are waking up to gifts that they never knew they had. So they're seeing things, they're experiencing more paranormal energy than ever before. We've got a lot of kids being born with gifts and abilities. I mean, all of our kids, Jessica and I, a lot of this work that we've been doing is to be able to explain some of this stuff to our own kids who are very gifted in a way that was better than what we were taught. And so they've got, it's almost like we're watching evolution happen in front of us, with these kids being born with these spiritual gifts.
So you think it's measurable?
Yeah, I think so. And my friend who's studying the Schumann resonance, every now and then he'll call me and he'll be like, "Did you feel that? Did you feel that?" And it's he's watching the spikes go up, and if you look into that, and I think science is catching up with being able to study some of this too, and that's part of the age of Aquarius as well. With just it's more techie.
Yeah. Was it the Monroe Institute that was running the random number generator that spiked like right before 9/11?
That sounds right. I don't remember.
I think it was the Monroe Institute, but that was definitely. I mean, it doesn't lie. It was such a clear spike. It wasn't like there was a spike like that 2 weeks ago. No, it was like a very distinct spike, and there was something that occurred.
Was
in a
that like
collective consciousness
right around the time when it was happening, like when we were about to switch? Because I think there's something to that collective fear, right? Like, I think it's Chad Gallick did a documentary. I can't remember the name of it.
There's also been a lot of measurable energetic shifts as well. A lot of psychics can trace their gifts, and me included, can go back to, there was a huge energetic shift in 2012. So a lot of psychics can trace their gifts back to that time, kind of.
Oh, really?
Waking up.
I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, and this is all astrology, and again, I don't have the exacts, but so we're going through a lot of that again right now, as we're shifting our vibration up.
So, does that mean that there are people who otherwise, full-grown adults that, haven't been able to kind of see and experience paranormal will, or is it really like a younger generation thing?
Well, that's kind of what happened to me. I mean, I wasn't going through my whole life seeing this stuff. I think I saw a lot when I was little, and I had imaginary friends, and I had different things happening when I was young. But I think that there's some self-preservation that happens in there too, where you kind of shut that down for whatever reason. And in my case, everyone around me in my life was telling me that there was no such thing, and it was just my imagination. So you're going to believe that if you don't know what to do with it, because that's a lot safer than trying to wrap your head around something that everybody is telling you isn't there.
It was just the gluten, Natalie. Just the gluten.
Yeah. But as I started to, I mean, it was really when we started doing paranormal investigations. Like we would walk into these haunted houses and these really heavy history places, and all of a sudden, like I'd start getting information dumps, and things were starting to happen. And of course, I'm a very creative person too, so I was constantly, and used to be a lawyer, so you've got that balance between I'm super creative, I'm also very logically wired with that legal training. So how am I going to make sense of this? And I was constantly trying to prove to myself, like, how do I know that I'm not making this stuff up?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and so then it was just about like, okay, now I've got these gifts coming online. I'm going to start taking classes. I'm going to start investigating a little bit more about what this is and what it means for me, because every one of us is wired differently too. So if you go take psychic development classes from one psychic, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how your gifts work. You still have to do that journey of exploration to find how your own gifts and abilities work.
Yeah. And if the veil continues to get like super thin, maybe there's a reality where ghosts need legal representation. And Natalie, you're the perfect. It'll be like the movie Ghost. They're just all going to be coming and lining up.
Well, that was kind of my that was kind of the foundation for my fictional characters that I started writing before I knew I was psychic. So in my fictional stories, I had a character who was a lawyer, a law student, and she started I just thought it would be fascinating to take somebody who's trained to think logically and rationally and then give them something completely irrational to deal with. So that's where my fiction ideas came from. And so my lawyer ended up with these ghost clients that had their unfinished business, that had to try to she barely believed in what was happening herself, and then having to just deal with this. So I didn't realize that I was kind of writing my own story at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of not, because sometimes I think that maybe we are living in something akin to like a simulation, and what if these other entities are fully conscious, and we're just not at a stage where we're interacting with them, right? And at some point, what if that becomes the case? You're walking down the street and you just see these other things, living in a different way, but right beside us.
So my family, when my kids were little, we lived in Belgium for 6 years when they were very tiny. And a few years right before COVID, the fall before COVID, my now ex-husband and I traveled over to London and Ireland for a wedding. And it was the first time I'd ever been in London where I knew I was psychic. And I can't believe how many dead people are there. Like, I remember walking out of the hotel and just feeling all the layers of energy. And that's something that I was certainly not open to the first time I traveled there.
Have you guys ever seen the movie Waking Life, the animation?
No.
Waking Life. It is a rotoscope animation, so humans, and then it's animation over top. And it was made by Richard Linklater. I think you will love it. It's very, very fascinating. It's philosophical. It has a lot to do with consciousness and death and reality. I think you'll both appreciate it. But anyway, so that's it. We're here. I can't believe it.
Oh, it's already over. It went so
over.
fast.
No. We've got, just really quick, we've got Monsters of the Northeast and Ghostly Tales of Pennsylvania. So everyone listening, please go check those out. Natalie and Jessica, any last words before we? Natalie, you're a lawyer. Last words, closing statement.
No, it's just it's been a fun way to wrap up Halloween season.
Cool. Yeah. I appreciate having you guys on. I really
thank
do.
you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been like a busy month for us, and we're both super stoked that this is how we got to spend Halloween night.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, cool. And my brain is a little fried.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure it's a very busy time for you guys, indeed. And Alien Love will just leave with this. She said, "Waking Life is a must-see."
Okay, we're gonna see it for sure.
It's one of my favorites. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. And happy Halloween.
Yes,
Happy
you too.
Halloween.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you guys for joining. I appreciate your comments in chat, and hopefully, I'll see you on the comment sections in wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you could therefore leave a comment down below and rate this as high as possible, I'd really, really appreciate it. All that helps organically grow the podcast here on the Mystic Lounge YouTube channel. And if you like this content, maybe you'll also like Coffee and UFOs, also a podcast on this channel. Both podcasts are rebroadcast on the UnX network, 11 p.m.'s 11 p.m.'s 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 2 a.m. 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 11 p.m. Pacific Time. Yeah, my brain's a little fried still too, Natalie. But that's where you can find this replayed every week. And I think that's it. So just one last thing, just a friendly reminder to, if you can, go to the Carbondalean Festival, which is in Carbondale, Pennsylvania. If you live nearby, it'd be great to see you. There's a lot of great speakers. And the end of that is Heather Taddy. She's gonna kind of be the last speaker, last event of the night. And it looks like it's gonna be a really good time. And there's also a site visit during the festival as well. So you'll go to where the alleged UFO crash took place in the reservoir there. All right, so that's it. Peace and love to everyone out there. Thank you so much for all your continued support. And until next time, I'll see you on the flip side.